Like to me, to use a really bizarre metaphor, it's like Zenith is like, I love you and we need to get a divorce, but like, I think you're an incredible person. This just wasn't the right match. You know what I mean?
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe, if we run with that metaphor to Baume Mercier, it's like, we never should have gotten married anyway. Like, what were we doing?
Yeah. This is Open Work, a look inside the watch industry, a podcast from Collective Horology. I'm Gabe Riley, co-founder of Collective.
And I'm Asher Apkin, co-founder of Collective. Collective Horology is an independent watch retailer based in Southern California, and we carry a wide range of independent watches, including Ming, Atelier Wen, Karl Suki and Zone, and more. To learn more about us and check out our available inventory, visit collectivehorology.com.
A few notes on Ming. On Atelier Wen. And Karl Suki. Ming recently reintroduced both the Bluefin and Uni dive watches. They are currently available, at least. And these are watches that have been obviously well regarded, beloved, high in demand, and they've been reintroduced for 2026. They're, of course, available at collectivehorology.com. And then Atelier Wen, likewise, they have just released, it's technically their 2025 Millesme version of the Perception with a beautiful Peter Site dial, but that is available to order now at collectivehorology.com. That has a limited window for ordering, so if you're into the Perception, if you're into Peter Site, if you are into these watches, they will be available through Atelier Wen and through us until February 5th, the evening of, at least in the United States, because there are international time zones that get crossed with that release. And then finally, Karl Suki and Zone. We recently just published the Watches of Karl Suki and Zone, and that one was a fun one to record. We talk a little bit about the history of the brand, but really focus on the modern brand, the design philosophy that drives it, and what just makes those watches so cool, so beguiling, so original in their take. So that's available, of course, on our YouTube channel, and it's also available in podcast format. You can just search for the Watches of podcast from Collective Horology on your podcast platform of choice. So lots of action to start 2026. And speaking of action, there is something of musical chairs going on in the watch industry. And, this was something that I think it came up in our 2024 watch industry predictions.
Yep.
When we predicted brand consolidation and sort of brand reshuffling. So in particular, some of the major players in the industry, holding companies looking to shed some brands and sell them off. And I think at the time we said, like, this is probably about the moment in the industry where things like this start to happen, because the industry had been on sort of this multi-year decline at that point in time. But we also said, oh my gosh, does the Swiss watch industry move at a glacial pace? And of course, yes, it does. So here we are at the beginning of 2026, and we really have the first kind of major move here, which is Richemont has shed Baume and Mercier, and they have sold them to an Italian luxury group, the Daimani Group. Traditionally, they've been more focused on jewelry. They own a number of jewelry brands, but they do also, in the last 20 years, they've added watch brands, and they've added some watches to their jewelry brands as well. But they will be taking on Baume and Mercier. There's a lot to discuss about how that's happening and the logistics of it. But we're starting to see this happen. Did it surprise you it took this long?
No. I mean, look, business obviously, I think, especially in the corporate world, is lagging, not leading. So it would take a fair amount of time for some of the things that we thought might happen to happen, because that prediction was 16, 18 months ago. And if we go back to the reason that we made that prediction, it was tied to redundancy in the corporate watch world. A lot of it was, okay, like let's look at Richemont, right? You got Baume Mercier at that entry price point. You have several other brands at that entry price point. Swatch Group's a good example of this, right? With Tissot and Hamilton and
a dog pile in the kind of mid range.
Yeah, all kind of, or in this sense, the entry level.
Yeah,
all kind of competing for the same piece of that part of the collecting puzzle. Admittedly, those are very different watch brands with very different personalities, no doubt about it. But they're competing in that sort of sub $5,000 range.
Mm-hmm.
Baume Mercier is also kind of an interesting brand in the sense that you have to have a lot of respect in this case for Richemont, because they tried. Lord knows they tried.
Yeah.
They tried both from a product standpoint, like the Baume Mercier Riviera.
Some of the newer Rivieras are pretty cool.
Yep. A couple years ago, almost half a decade ago, they tried spinning off or creating a spin-off brand just called Baume.
Yeah. I remember that one.
Exactly.
Yeah, they tried.
So they did it, but and it's easy to sort of sit back and say, oh, well, they should have done this, they should have done that. In the end, I think it just sort of demonstrates that brand just never had the juice to do what it needed to do for it to have a seat at the corporate table. And if you look at what Richemont's doing, if I were sitting in some of the chairs that Richemont leadership are doing, I think this is the right idea. They've clearly been putting their effort and their energy into the higher end. Jaeger-LeCoultre is definitely going through a bit of a renaissance. Panerai, Lord knows, needs it. Lange has, you put aside all the quibbling around the edges, like that brand has grown quite significantly in terms of average price point and in terms of its demand from a new watch standpoint. And of course, Vacheron has done an amazing job of turning that brand around into the powerhouse that it is right now. So you can see the focus.
Don't forget Cartier.
Of course.
Yeah,
and Cartier,
how could you forget Cartier?
How could I forget Cartier? Which, of course, represents a significant percentage of the total revenue of Richemont. So when you look at those brands and then you say, Baume Mercier, you can see why they might say, you know what, it might make sense for us to excise this from the portfolio, bring in some significant capital to help us grow the rest of the brands, and this won't make a meaningful impact on our bottom line.
Yeah, I mean, so one question for you on this, we talked about the sort of the dog pile, and I think in broad terms what the industry considers the mid-range, these are watches between $1,000 and $5,000, and Baume Mercier competes in there. There aren't a lot of Richemont brands that really compete squarely in there. I mean, IWC drifts into there, Jaeger can drift into there.
Not so much anymore.
But really, I mean, Baume was the sort of the entry-level mid-range brand for Richemont. So it's not like there was a dog pile within Richemont and Baume Mercier couldn't find its footing within Richemont. I think the challenge for them is that is the toughest segment in the market.
Now, look, that's not true. I mean, I think that they compete. I think in that segment also was Montblanc.
Oh gosh, we'll talk more about Montblanc in a little bit
for sure. But the ice divers and some of the entry
they're in that
pieces
segment.
are absolutely in that segment for sure.
Yeah, and those seem to have some more traction than Baume Mercier. But Baume Mercier
that makes sense, right? I mean, take yourself out of the watch collector sphere.
It's a straightforward dive watch from a luxury brand you've heard of.
There you go.
Yeah. But Baume Mercier, one of the reasons I think it went, I read in the reporting it went to Daimani was the brand, or Damiani, sorry, Damiani, it's a brand that has strength in the Italian market. Now,
also, I believe the distributor in the market for the watch brand initially.
Interesting. Okay.
So I don't think this was a foolish acquisition. This is clearly an acquisition by a luxury group that has a very strong belief in what they're buying into and probably thinks that they can do a better job of it if they were in control.
Yeah. So one thought I had about that is like, when I heard okay, it's going to a buyer in the Italian market, it's going to a buyer that has a stable of jewelry brands. Mm-hmm. Does Baume Mercier sort of become like a baby Bulgari? That was my first
first
thought.
More about that, really?
Well, I think a lot of people, when they think about Bulgari, certainly I do. If I close my eyes and I think of a Bulgari watch, I think about the Octo Finissimo. And then if I think about Baume Mercier and like the Riviera, for instance, I could see that with a more Italian design sensibility, a more sort of jewelry design sensibility, you could end up taking this brand into more of sort of a fashion and jewelry direction, and it could round out that portfolio. I don't know how you take the Baume to the point you and I were talking about. I don't know how you take the Baume Mercier brand and just put it under different ownership and expect it will perform better.
Well,
you need to change the product like Bulgari did. I mean, they've made massive changes to their product line, which drove the appeal of their watches. Parmigiani is another great example of a brand that rethought their product strategy and their kind of design codes and has had great success with that. So I wonder if Baume Mercier in different hands gets a fresh start from a product.
I mean, the devil's in the details here, because you can't just like excise a brand like that cleanly from a giant holding company like Richemont.
And it won't be excised cleanly. There's a transition period here.
Well, and part of that may very well be that a lot of the calibers leveraged by those brands are made by Val Fleurier.
Exactly.
And for those who don't know, Val Fleurier is a movement manufacturer that is owned by Richemont, makes movements for everyone from everyone really. I mean, from Panerai to IWC to Baume Mercier. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, even on some of the entry level watches from Vacheron. So you can't just cut that out. No. And then there's all sorts of interesting questions too, like what happens to the retail network?
Well, yeah, there's the retail network. There's the people, the sales folks on the corporate side in the field around the world.
All the employees, period.
Yeah, exactly. So
I'm sure there is a Baume Mercier boutique of some variety somewhere in the world. So it's an interesting question, and I think it'll be a fascinating look into what it means for a holding company to part ways with a brand that has been fully integrated.
Yeah, and as part of this, there's like a 12-month or apparently at least a 12-month period where Richemont will continue to provide transition services, so logistics, back office, all these sorts of things. You have to wonder if there are more long-term agreements in place for access to movements or other parts. I mean, don't forget, not only does Richemont supply many of its own movements, they also have their own foundry.
Yeah.
So they supply a lot of their, cases and case materials and things like that. So there's a lot that goes into this. The other thing that sort of set this move up, sort of the first chess move for Richemont is Richemont has had speaking of musical chairs, a lot of management changes over the last couple of years, particularly within the watchmaking maisons. And the current CEO of Richemont, who assumed the mantle a couple of years ago.
No, I'm sorry. Jerome Lambert was the former CEO. Excuse me.
Yeah, he's now
JLC.
He's back at JLC. But the current CEO of Richemont split up what they had basically like a centralized organization for their watchmaking maison. So they reported into, I think it was like a specialist watchmaker group that then reported up to the CEO. And one of the first moves the new CEO, whose name escapes me, made was basically broke that group up and said, no, each maison is now reporting to the CEO directly and responsible for their own P&L. It's not going to be rolled up into this group, and these things can't just sort of be painted over. And so that, I think, left Baume Mercier in a place where, to your point, within the group, it's relatively exposed.
Yeah.
And then two, it sets it up because what you're starting to do there corporately and in the organization structure of the company is you're starting to undo a lot of the things that ties any given brand into the overall corporate structure.
But that's the way it's been for a long time. I mean, like prior to like 2020, 2019, the concept of like Richemont as a holding company was way more on paper than it was in practice, and this is true of many like holding companies like this, where it's like, yeah, sure, we own you. And yes, you roll up to us and the whole thing. But operationally, essentially, these are all independent companies operating separately, and I always sort of had this question in my mind about like, well, that seems like a missed opportunity, right? Like why, if I'm a salesperson at Lange and a guy walks in the front door and he says, hi, my name is Gabe Riley, I would love to be able to plug him into a CRM and then find out, much to my joy and surprise, that he's a huge Lange client.
Sure. Yeah.
Like there are massive advantages, not just from data mining, but also from client service around a holding company structure. When you roll that back, it's not just a question of P&L, it's also a question of like client service, because I'm sure listeners here have had the experience of being a major client of a Panerai or a major client of like Vacheron or whatever. And then you go into a Jaeger-LeCoultre and you're like, hi, I have invested significantly in Richemont. And they're like, your name is Richard Mont?
Yes. Yeah.
What now?
No idea.
Exactly. Like completely irrelevant. And it's one of those things where it's like, if you set up separate P&Ls and you do decentralize that way, it might make sense to make the brands into the fighting beta fish that might drive to higher revenue, but it's not in service of clients.
One thing I will say we've seen,
let me rephrase that. In fairness, it's not as in service of clients as it could be.
Yeah, I think you're making a trade-off.
Sure.
Right? One of the trade-offs could be like, no, we want to have our brands, or our maisons, as they call them, be more independent so they can really have their own identity and do less of what Swatch does, which is like forcing brands into particular price positionings and territories.
You sell that now.
Yeah, exactly. And the beatings will continue until morale improves.
Oh,
but
that's one of my favorites.
That's a good chestnut. So I do think that's a benefit. And like we said, every company has to decide in which ways they're going to suck. And I think the trade-off here is like, well, we want to give these brands their own identity and their own creativity. And I'll say from our own experience, we've worked with and talked to many Richemont watch brands in our travels.
Sure.
And I think what we found is, and obviously we've done collaborations with a number of them, but you better believe, we've met with others, we've proposed ideas to others, we've had, encounters with other executives or people for any number of reasons from these different watchmaking maisons, and culturally they are extremely different.
For sure.
IWC has a very different culture from Montblanc, has a very different culture from Jaeger, and very different culture from Vacheron.
Yeah,
these are all
100%.
brands in one way or another we've spoken to. We've never spoken to the good folks at Baume Mercier. However, go figure. And so what you have is these organizations are truly extremely different culturally. And I think you and I, we worked corporately at big companies that held multiple brands. And, like when I worked at Facebook, I worked at Instagram, and Instagram had like its own culture that was sort of separate from Facebook and like prided themselves on it, but like not really. And, there are other brands within that company that had like their own culture, but not really. And I was sort of expecting that, in our dealings with different brands from Richemont. And I'll tell you, they may have some of the same back-end systems and things like that, but culturally, these brands are very, very different. And, maybe that's for better or worse, but that's a trade-off you make here. Now, speaking of different companies and different cultures, let's talk a little bit about LVMH. And there is a similar sort of, and let's be clear, this is a rumor, and it's a rumor that LVMH has denied, but there's a similar rumor surrounding LVMH and Zenith in particular that LVMH is shopping the brand.
Mm-hmm.
And this has been reported in a number of places. I believe it was reported initially last year by AWP, which is a Swiss news agency. It's been reported in the Business of Fashion and in a number of other trade publications. So this is out there. Again, LVMH denies this, but the reporting is essentially that LVMH has taken steps to explore the sale of Zenith, and it's being driven by Zenith's financial performance. Now, again, LVMH denies all this, but of course, I would conjecture, if you were exploring this and looking at selling a brand for all sorts of reasons, not the least of which is just how long and laborious a process like this can be and how much can unfold in the intermediary steps, you'd probably deny it as well.
Although I think we do need to be careful that while Baume Mercier and Zenith are both fall under the broader conversation of like reshuffling or sales or what have you,
they're very different brands.
Yeah, they're extremely different brands. And, and with very different, potential hypothetical challenges, right? Like Baume Mercier, I would presume is having challenges around differentiation, right? Like what makes...
And competing in a segment of the market that's in a rough spot right now.
Sure. Zenith does not have that problem.
No.
Zenith is highly differentiated, very clearly articulated brand, very clear designs. But LVMH as a company is going through a lot of palace intrigue and changes,
mm-hmm.
both in terms of individuals and leadership roles, moving into different roles, et cetera.
The drama around a succession of Bernard Arnault and what's going to happen with his family and who's taken. There's just palace intrigue galore.
Can't make a Tomlet without breaking some gray.
You certainly cannot. I mean, this is truly. I mean, it's the stuff of an HBO series.
Yeah, but Zenith is interesting to me in the sense that Zenith to me has always, and I mean, look, full transparency, we know a lot of people at Zenith. We love a lot of people at Zenith. And Zenith...
Love the watches, too.
I'm also, frankly, like there is no collective without Zenith because they were the first people that supported us. So obviously I'm emotionally tied into this brand.
Mm-hmm.
I can't be quite as objective as I would be elsewhere. But I would argue that with Zenith, it's about how much someone wants to believe. I mean, it really kind of is the Ted Lasso believe sign. The watchmaking is there. The creativity is there. The heart and soul is there. If that can be more of a priority at another company, hell yes.
Oh, that's a good way of putting it.
And I mean, look, that doesn't mean that it's not a priority of LVMH. Like, I'm not doing this to take a pot shot at LVMH.
Yeah.
It's just, it's a big company. Their focus is in different places. If selling the company gives them a cash infusion to put more, love into Hublot, more love into Tag Heuer, more love into Bulgari, et cetera, I mean, okay. And then if that split off goes to, if that brand goes to another party that sees what really makes Zenith something special, then A-okay. I see a very big difference between why an LVMH might want to say goodbye to Zenith from Richemont saying goodbye to Baume Mercier.
Yeah.
Like to me, to use a really bizarre metaphor, it's like Zenith is like, I love you and we need to get a divorce, but like, I think you're an incredible person. This just wasn't the right match. You know what I mean?
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe,
Yeah.
If we run with that metaphor to Baume Mercier, it's like, we never should have gotten married anyway. Like, what were we doing?
Yeah.
Yeah,
and I'm a bit skeptical of this. It could be true. It might not be true. Again, these are these are rumors. There is reporting against it. We should give that some credence. At the same time, we should give credence that LVMH is giving this a full-throated denial.
Yeah.
But with the LVMH and Zenith thing, it surprises me, one, because we talked about like the role of Val Fleurier and integration within the Richemont group. Well, Zenith is not just a brand within the portfolio of LVMH. It does supply calibers to other maisons within LVMH. Now, of course, they could still continue to do that if they were part of a separate company, or movements could be acquired from somewhere else. But just this last week at LVMH Watch Week, there are other LVMH brands that announced and revealed a number of novelties with Zenith Elite calibers in them.
I mean, there's all sorts of stuff like that. There's also shared intellectual property in other formats, like quick release bracelets between Zenith and Hublot.
Materials.
100%. And this stuff, and it's like, this is a really sticky wicket because it's all tied up in like, agreements with third-party vendors who license various different, products and ideas to LVMH, but they're made available to this brand. So it's like, this goes back to this whole idea of like, if you divorce yourself, if you excise a brand from the company, what is actually the brand? Like, what are you buying, right?
Yeah. And also it points out to why this is such a difficult and painstaking thing. There's so many things to unwind. It's not just payroll and like this person moves to another office. It's all this stuff. Supplier contracts.
We have
is
a watch.
The Zenith supplier contract even valid for, I'm making this up, for ceramic bracelets if they're no longer part of the group?
We have a watch that's currently in service, a collaboration that we did with Zenith, and that goes to the LVMH service center.
Oh, great. Yeah, good
so
point.
It's like so many things you have to consider when you consider what it means to, quote, sell a brand. It's not like, it's not like something that's like exists in its own hermetically sealed, pocket. And you're like, whoop, there you go.
Yeah.
One Zenith, So, and when you think about it too, it's kind of like, cost of ownership is a thing, right? I mean, that was my parents grew up, they always were obsessed with Jaguars. And the question was like, well, it's not can you like afford a Jaguar? It's can you afford to like repair the Jaguar?
I'm learning that lesson myself painfully now with
how much
with
did
my
you spend
latest
on that
car.
car?
Yeah, I recently picked up an E46, a BMW 3 Series. It's a 330 Ci, so nothing fancy like an M3. But I've spent more money fixing the car in the 2 months I've owned it than I did to buy the car.
So
there's your cost of ownership. It's not can I afford the car, it's can I afford to maintain
exactly.
it.
And I would argue that's the thing about Zenith or Baume Mercier or like whatever brand, right? In the end, it's not just can you buy the brand, it's what about the service center? What about the parts? What about all the contracts that are outstanding? What about
parts?
Like, like all of this stuff is what goes into like the sack of a brand.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to ask yourself, like, not only do I believe that I have the marketing and brand acumen to drive the future of this brand, but like, can I
take it on?
Can I fix the watches?
Yeah.
And
can I take on all? Can I even take on the integration? The other thing that's going on with LVMH is like, forget whether or not they keep Zenith or spin it off. Like, there already is a ton of movement happening within the watchmaking division of LVMH. So if you look at their acquisition, for instance, of Le Fabrique du Temps, if you look at how they've rebooted the Gerald Genta and the Daniel Roth brands, if you look at how much more seriously Louis Vuitton as a brand is taking watchmaking, there is a lot, the continued rise of Bulgari. There's already a lot that's happening under the hood with the watchmaking brands and the watchmaking aspect of LVMH. Like, they've come quite a way. I was listening to the Enthusiast podcast from Stephen Pulverin and Justin Haas, our good friends. And this is a point that they made, which is if you look back 10 years, 5 years, LVMH as a watchmaking force and just the number of watches that they're making, the brands they have has expanded aggressively. Really, 10 years ago, it was Tag Heuer, Hublot, and Zenith. And like Bulgari was doing some watchmaking off on the side, but Bulgari's now been really pulled into the fray of LVMH watchmaking, and you of course have these other brands.
LVMH has been pulled into the fray of watchmaking.
Yeah, exactly, exactly, and it's pretty remarkable what's happened. And so on the one hand, you're seeing LVMH making a lot of substantial investments in watchmaking. So you're kind of like, and there's another thing I want to talk about with them, but they're making some substantial investments in watchmaking. They're adding and beefing up their watchmaking bona fides. So why would they spin this thing off?
Is it bona fide?
I don't know. And then the other thing that's going on is there have been, speaking of rumors, this isn't really a rumor, but a number of years ago, Bernard Arnault, who is the majority shareholder in LVMH, or at least has control of LVMH. I believe he's the CEO and is the head honcho.
Great acquired episode, by the way.
Great acquired episode. He has made investments in Richemont. So he owns a minority stake of Richemont. Now, he has said publicly that he's not interested in taking over Richemont, and that, Johann Rupert is a friend of his and he trusts him and he wants him to run Richemont and all this kind of stuff. They both said this sort of thing, but that, he believes in them and wants to make an investment. Why on earth would he be interested in Richemont? Well, Cartier is the crown jewel. Van Cleef & Arpels is a huge business. Sure. LVMH does very well in jewelry. We talked about this in past episodes. The jewelry making divisions of Richemont are really the ones that are driving the business, the growth of the business, the revenue of the business, the profitability of the business. And if you're Bernard Arnault, it's like, what's that old fable? It's like, why did the scorpion sting someone? Because he's a scorpion. It's kind of that. It's like, well, look at all the acquisitions and all the moves Bernard Arnault has made over the decades. How could he not want Cartier specifically? And then if you think about, Richemont and what they've done spinning off Baume Mercier and really focusing on their more premium watchmaking brands, it's like, are they setting themselves up for an acquisition here? So there's this bigger picture of whether you want to buy that conspiracy or not. LVMH has significantly beefed up watchmaking.
Sure.
So the fact that they'd be looking to shop Zenith, which is integrated into their other operations, which has its own lane and its own point of view and its role that it fills, is surprising to me.
Yeah, I don't know. I think all of that may be true, but corporations still do corporation stuff.
And we don't have access to the books. Part of the reporting here is that the reason why, and again, this is reporting, for instance, from the business of fashion, that Zenith has been loss-making for years. And so it's adding to the pressure from the executives to sort of do something. Hey, it's Gabe. Openwork is proudly ad-free and requires no paid subscription. If you'd like to support the show, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review on your podcast platform of choice. Please also check out and subscribe to Collective Horology on YouTube, where you'll find hundreds of videos we've made on independent watchmaking. You can find our channel at collectivehorology.com/YouTube. And of course, you can always support the podcast by picking up a watch from over a dozen independent brands, along with our latest merch at collectivehorology.com. Thanks for listening and for your support. Now back to the show.
Yeah.
Who knows?
We'll see. But regardless, two interesting one confirmed, one hypothetical movers in the watch world.
And then you have the meta chess game of Bernard Arnault taking a stake in the Richemont group. And wherever there's smoke, there's fire with that kind of stuff.
I always found that
I don't think he does anything just because he believes in another executive and wants to support their work. Come on.
Yeah, sure. but I mean, his interest in Hermes is also very well known.
Yeah.
And is also
I believe he owns a minority stake there as well. He's made a small investment.
Yeah, although there's some really interesting reporting that's been out there for years too about that. Like that is a very antagonistic relationship. Hermes is not interested in selling, and Hermes does not want anybody aggressively.
What's the ownership structure there? Because I think it's essentially private for all intents and purposes, but some number of shares are floated publicly.
I'm not entirely sure how it's structured.
We don't really know.
But it is.
Don't listen to us about.
But it is still largely under family control.
All right, well, forget rumors. Let's get back to reality and talk about watches and wonders, which is there's a brand reshuffling happening within watches.
A brand reshuffling or a grand reshuffling?
A grand brand
reshuffling. Grand reshuffling.
Gosh, maybe we shouldn't record so late in the afternoon.
Probably not.
Let's talk a little bit about the seating chart at Watches and Wonders, because there's a few interesting things going on there. we talked about AP joining, and we talked about why we think AP is joining. But one thing speaking of the seating chart, I think is really interesting is like they're kind of being put in this backwater corner.
Well, I mean, look,
they're sort of being sent to the kids' table.
You know what's interesting about that show? Many things, but what's fascinating to me is like the actual Pal Expo is way, way, way bigger than Watches and Wonders.
It's huge.
Yet they seem to want to like jam everything into like the existing footprint. Like they won't extend. Like you could just build another hall. You know?
Yeah, well, there was even a more simple solution. I'm trying to pull up a map, but if memory serves me right, Bell & Ross is out, Watches and Wonders this year. And Bell & Ross's booth, which was a significant booth in size and scale, was right across from Rolex, Tudor, Chopard, and Patek Philippe.
Yes.
So why would an AP just take over that booth? And maybe it's not as big as AP would have liked, but they could have, to your point, built conceivably further into the show itself.
Well, sure, but part of that is because Chanel took over that space. So
they were in the Chanel zone.
Well, they're Chanel brand.
I think Chanel has a stake in them. Yeah,
I think they're the primary.
Yeah.
So Chanel just took that entire space.
Got it. Okay, so it wasn't necessary. Okay, so that we can quash that conspiracy theory, but specifically. So a couple of years ago when Bremont joined the show along with a number of smaller brands, they opened this sort of like mezzanine space. So it's kind of upstairs from the rest of
That's where they could showcase our favorite brand, Bremont.
Yes.
Bremont.
And this was primarily done for Bremont. So in this sort of second level of Watches and Wonders, you've got Bremont, you have a smaller hall of small and independent brands. And then primarily what this area where AP is specifically had been for years was like this executive dining room. So it was basically this like faux restaurant where brand executives could make a reservation and like take VIPs, retailers, press to like have a sit down, like served fancy lunch at a table. And you can imagine that's not necessarily the most high priority thing. So it was sort of put upstairs and off in the corner. Well, now AP is literally where that restaurant used to be. And then that restaurant has been pushed even further into the bowels of the show.
I can't help but find it amusing that like the spot that you couldn't get a table at is of course the place that AP but we have the perfect place for you, AP.
It's poetic. So it's like, they're joining, but knowing what we know about AP and how important, their image is and how they present themselves and show up, which I get, like you're a global luxury brand. You're not just a watch brand, but you're a brand. It's interesting to me they've been sort of seated at the kids' table. So we'll see how it goes. Now, sometimes these brands don't want to be anywhere near each other. They may have said like, I don't want to be in earshot of Patek Philippe or anyone else, but I find that kind of hard to believe.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, look, I am the first to take an easy shot at AP. I honestly think this is more of just like this is where the space was, not any sort.
They could have refused the space too. They didn't like it.
Yeah, well, I don't think they can afford to refuse the space because I think they're there because they need retailers, as I've said, and we'll come back to that. But and you've said opposite. You think they're there for the media, so we'll find out.
The other thing they did with this space, so they rerouted the shuttles. So when they opened the second floor space, you used to enter Watches and Wonders on that sort of main floor level, and you'd feed right into this area that was sort of in the middle of the show. You could go one way for Patek, Rolex, Tudor, and the Chanel brands, Zenith, and others. You go the other way basically for the Richemont brands. And so you entered basically in the middle of the show, go one way or the other, essentially. The other year when they opened that like backwater upstairs space, they rerouted the shuttle buses that would take you from your hotel to the event to drop you off at this weird back entrance to force you to walk through that area.
Yeah, because that's where they put all the septons who have the bells so they can go shame, shame, shame as you walk right by Bremont. I mean, it's all part of that tradition.
So we'll see. They'll probably force us again to walk by Bremont and AP this year. But look, I think when they made that change,
the change
they
this year is that AP will allocate the bells to people.
Okay. Fair enough. We'll see if they do that. I think when they first opened that space, it made sense because people conceivably had no idea that space was there and who was up there. So you sort of, it's like IKEA, you have to walk all the way through the different things to get to what you want.
You will walk through the plants before you leave.
Yeah, no, you can't just buy the bookcase.
Look, in all seriousness, I putting aside my silliness, I don't think it matters where AP is. AP is AP. If somebody if they could be dangling from a crane above that you had to climb a rope ladder to get into, and like both clients and ADs would do that, I'm sure. What I am most interested here is not where they're placed, but what their end goal is, and only time will tell when we get to that one.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the map here because we get sent the map through a back channel, but suffice it to say, if you're any other brand that is in that upstairs area, you are stoked that AP is up there. Yeah, because it creates a center of gravity up there.
Well, I mean, in fairness, like it's a good location anyway because everybody's got to walk by you.
Yeah,
but separate from that, another thing that I found particularly interesting too was Montblanc has left the show, and
well, yeah, we covered Moser moving up within the show. They're moving into Montblanc's old space.
Yeah, and who are they surrounded by? Parmigiani, Longanzone, Vacheron Constantin, Cartier, IWC, and Ulysse Nardin.
Do you have the map?
I do.
You got the map.
I got the map. You got it. It's in Slack, man.
We bring it up in Slack. I don't think the map has been published yet, but we got it through a back channel. You know who you are. Thank you.
The question for me about Moser here is an interesting one. Because Moser has been understandably very proud of their move from the sort of independent section.
Yeah.
The Carré de Horloger.
Carré de Horloger. I apologize.
Carré?
I apologize to any French speakers.
Get thee to Duolingo. Anyway, they moved from there onto the quote unquote main floor. And I think that actually says a lot about not only just their growth as a brand and all of that, but also how they view themselves. They view, and this is not unique to Watches and Wonders because we see this in who they've partnered with from a retail standpoint and the way that they built out, right? You go to New York City now, you want to see a Moser 5-6 years ago, you went to go see Leon at Cellini.
Yeah.
Now you go to the Time Machine. You go to the Bucherer Time Machine.
Yep. In Vegas, you go to Watches of Switzerland in the Wynn Hotel.
Yep.
Moser has an entire wall next to Vacheron. And by the way, who are they across from now at Watches and Wonders? Vacheron. They're pretty stoked about that.
Yeah, so I think what this is doing is it's giving you some insight. And it's not like this is super hidden or anything, but it's giving pretty clear and obvious insight into the Milan strategy around this brand, which is, yes, maybe we did start as an independent, but we believe that we have the product, the strategy, and the support to become a mainstream competitor to these multi-100-year established brands. I'm really fascinated by this because this is the first of our generation of independents that has made the decision to do that. And, I suppose maybe you could say that about Parmigiani, maybe. But like it's different because Parmigiani, it was sort of there versus these guys who
Parmigiani
didn't
choice. Grow up in the kind of contemporary independent watchmaking space the way Moser did. It came up among
but there are parallels
between the MB&Fs and Chapeks and all those.
Sure, but there are parallels between Parmigiani and the various companies they own, and I think some of the acquisitions that we've seen, in terms of the actual back end that is owned by or partially owned by.
Like Agenor has a major investment for Moser.
I forget the name of the company that makes all the hairsprings. That'll come back to me, but they're also very heavily owned by. If not,
Moser outright owns it. Yeah, they make their hairsprings.
There you go.
And many hairsprings for others.
Yeah, for many others. Yeah. So my point is, this is a really interesting and important thing to watch because this is a brand that has always been, if I'm being super blunt, like really ballsy.
Yes.
And
extremely creative, unorthodox.
Yep.
Yeah. And a maverick brand, truly.
Yeah. And they've made this choice. So I'm very interested, curious, and
they've positioned themselves among the other mavericks. They were in the Carré and they were next to Armstrong and Moser and Chapek, or obviously they're next to Moser, Chapek and others. They were in this space that was this fresh space of creativity that had life and was unorthodox, and where risk-taking was on not just rewarded but on full display. They were in the mix, and they fit in that space because they were in a hall of mavericks. Now they're in a hall of very staid traditional brands. Does that mean that they're going to wear, are they going to show up wearing a suit, or are they going to be the crazy guy at the party? This is a really interesting question. I'll be very interested to follow Moser and see how they evolve as a brand or don't. in this next stage of growth that they're going for. But what is interesting to me about this is at every show we've ever been to, if you go into, whether it's Geneva Watch Days or Watches and Wonders or wherever else you might see them, you always go into a space that is co-branded between Moser and Haute, which is their sister brand. And, you know, if you don't know Haute, they make really cool, unusual watches. I mean, let's talk about a brand that's very indie. Moser is leaving Haute behind. So the booth at Watches and Wonders will be Moser only. Haute will still be in the Carré. So they're taking over fully the sort of the Moser Haute co-branded booth. It'll be just Haute there in the Carré. So this is also interesting for me. This is the first time Moser's separating these two brands in how they show up. And it makes me think they've recognized here, like, okay, Haute, this is an indie brand through and through. Avant-garde designs and watchmaking. This brand belongs in the Carré. That's where it is. It's at home there. Moser no longer fits. And
okay. If I just offer one potential counterpoint, I'm going to read you from their press release.
Oh, do they talk about this?
Today, a new page is being written in the history books. After 9 years in the Carré de Horloger, H. Moser Cie will move to the main halls of Watches and Wonders in 2026. This is a natural evolution, demonstrating the financial strength, continued growth, and renown of the brand, from a little gem in the Carré de Horloger to a brand that is a key player on the international stage. H. Moser Cie's unique take on haute horlogerie. Okay, if I can just offer the counterpoint, there is a little bit of like the dog kicking up its back legs here. Everybody around them as they head up there.
Oh, yeah. They slammed the door on the way out.
So like this idea of like, oh, it's just the cute little gem in the Carré. Oh, you sweet little guys over there.
Oh, no, it's extremely patronizing toward the other
I will
brands.
Say,
but Haute, they're leaving Haute behind.
But that's my point. So I just, and I mean, look, I struggle a little bit here because I like Edouard and I like Moser a lot and I believe in them, but I don't like the idea of like, you know, tossing your hair back and wagging your finger at the entire world of the independents, which not only do we believe strongly in being the future of watchmaking and also where ingenuity and creativity lives, but it's also what gave birth to Moser.
Sure.
And I think the thing that I struggle with here is like, if they're going to do that to their competitive set, what are they going to do to all the people who believed in them as independent collectors? Because I'll tell you one thing. If they start acting like some of the major brands to the people who brought them to the dance, that ain't going to go well.
Well, their whole tagline is very rare. And part of the appeal of Moser is that it is undiscovered. It is for the cognoscenti. It is inside baseball. There is a wink to what they do, and they're very much walking away from it. What was the first reason there they cited for moving away from the Carré? They gave like 3 reasons in this opening sentence. I think the first one was financial strength.
Correct.
How dull. So, look, we talk all the time about how Watches and Wonders in the main halls of the show, it's the invasion of the suits.
Yeah.
You know, it's the white guy in the navy suit with the slick back hair and the leather briefcase.
Well, it's a natural
times
evolution
10,000,
demonstrating the financial strength, continued growth, and renown of the brand. You know what's missing from that?
Creativity, exciting products.
Yup.
So the watches themselves.
Imagine if you rewrote that sentence and you were like,
nothing about
a
watches.
Natural evolution based on the creativity and risk-taking of the brand.
That's been rewarded.
Exactly. Instead, what they're saying is like, well, we're rich now.
Yeah, we got the money.
So we're gonna use the executive washroom.
Yeah.
So
they've joined the invasion of the suits.
Well, I just made the cynical counterpoint. Now I'll argue with myself. The one
You're
thing
play the cynic and the pragmatist.
Sure. The thing I will say about Moser, and this is true since the moment we met them or they came to our moment or came to our awareness, is write them off at your own peril.
Yeah. Oh, these people are extremely shrewd and savvy.
Incredibly. And they are not afraid to pick and poke. So the question I have is, are we going to see Moser, who decided that they now want to, like, what they really wanted was a seat at the big kids table, and all of that was just pretense and jokes to get them there? Or are they going to show up
and continue to be the maverick.
I
hope they do.
I do too, because they could show up and they could thumb their nose at everyone around them, continue to be who they are, and still be financially successful and grow and maintain their vibe.
Yeah, and it's not a bad thing if you can walk into any watches of Switzerland in the world or Bucher or whatever, and you can always find a Moser, and it's always fresh, different, and distinct from everything else in that store.
So,
not a bad thing.
Sure. Could there be a cynical reason? Totally. Could there be a brilliant reason? Absolutely. So, let's find out.
All right. So as Moser moves in, a few brands move out. Specifically, Montblanc moves out of that space, and Montblanc leaves Watches and Wonders altogether. I find the departure of Montblanc from Watches and Wonders especially interesting, given the fact that Baume Mercier is still in there. Now, of course, as the cynic and the pragmatist, I might say, well, Richemont was shopping Baume Mercier. They want to continue to present the brand in as desirable a way as possible and favorable as way as possible to drive up the perceived value of the brand for anyone who buys it. They're not showing weakness. They're projecting strength. They're still at Watches and Wonders. They're still invested. This helps sort of build up the value of the brand in the eye of the buyer, potentially. If they just pulled them out, that makes it harder to sell. And also, they've said, we will continue to support the brand ongoing for about 12 months to transition. This is probably part of that. So, but it is interesting to me when it's like they've made a decision to sell and jettison one brand and they're keeping them at Watches and Wonders, yet Montblanc is still within Richemont and is out from Watches and Wonders. Now, Montblanc is not a pure watchmaking brand the way Baume Mercier is. If Baume Mercier isn't at Watches and Wonders, then what show are they at? Whereas Montblanc, this is a part of their business, but not the only part of their business. But it's significant to me that they're not there. What, if anything, does it say to you?
I don't know. I mean, I find that way less interesting than everything else we've discussed. It's in the sense that Montblanc is a multi-billion-dollar company that is heavily diversified and just relative to basically every other brand that's in that space. I mean, maybe they share some similarities by scale and scope with Tag Heuer, but you're right. This is a component of their business. It's not their primary business. Pens and leather goods are what that business is based on, and those are much higher margin, much easier to metabolize, and much more widely distributed than their watches.
Sure, but you have other brands there from Richemont for whom watches aren't their core business. You've got Van Cleef & Arpels still has a presence
but
there.
Van Cleef & Arpels is actual. I mean, Minerva notwithstanding, is actual watchmaking, and and I'm not trying to take a pot shot there too, but look, the ice divers they're fine. They're Solita driven, ETA driven, whatever, generic on point divers. They serve a purpose. You buy them in an airport.
They're well made.
3 beers and you have a nice day. But it's not. I just don't. To me, if I were Richemont, I would focus on the places that I need to focus on. And I would just say, you know what, we can save ourselves $1 million, probably more.
Oh, more.
It
costs way more than $1 million
by not building this out.
Yeah.
And Montblanc will still be an incredibly successful, well-renowned, highly regarded, incredible luxury brand.
Yeah, Montblanc doesn't need Watches and Wonders the way Baume Mercier does. It's existential
and I don't know that the incremental business that's picked up by I again, this is complete conjecture.
Who knows?
But I would imagine that the incremental business that's picked up by Montblanc at Watches and Wonders is much smaller than the incremental business that we see from other Richemont brands. And Watches and Wonders ain't cheap. So far from it. So I would say, I'm less interested.
You're not reading between the lines here too much.
I think I look at that one. Well, let me put it this way: Richemont is not going to sell Montblanc. No way. I mean, that is watches aside. That brand is an absolute luxury and globally recognized powerhouse. There is zero reason to say goodbye to that brand.
Yeah, obviously pens is a huge category. Fine leather goods, I would assume.
Oh my God, they're involved in everything. They make electronics.
Oh yeah, you're right. They make those
they make headphones. They make smartwatches. They make every conceivable form of they are more of a competitor.
They're ubiquitous.
Yeah, but they're more of a competitor to like the entry level of Louis Vuitton than they are.
Oh yeah,
in many ways than they are to the watch brands that are there. So to me, I'm like, yeah, okay, sure, they could be there. They could couldn't be there, but like that's less interesting to me than like Baume Mercier, for which that is what they are known, and they are gone.
All right. Well, there are a few other folks.
Well, actually, they're not gone from the show.
Yeah,
but you know what I mean. They're not. But they're gone from
moving,
the portfolio.
They're moving from the portfolio. Yeah, I mean, there are a few other brands that aren't coming back. Bell and Ross is the other sort of big one. That's really interesting.
But brands come and go. Arm & Strom, a brand that we carry, wasn't there for 2 years. Now they're coming back.
Speak Marin is leaving the show. They were there for 4 or 5 years, and now they're
brands come in, they come out.
Yeah, they're based in Geneva, and I can see for them talking about how much it costs to be there. They're like, our office is literally in Geneva. Like
totally.
Why are we doing this? Well, whereas also, a lot of the independents,
a lot of ancillary shows, right? I mean, like we have a lot of brands that we carry and that we work with that are next door at Time to Watches, and even some other brands that are now occupying the Hilton, which is also adjacent to the Palexpo.
Oh, the Hilton.
So
yeah,
I think part of this is also, if I'm being honest with you, just like other shows nibbling around the edges of Watches and Wonders and realizing like you don't have to pay whatever they charge per square foot to be in there if your clientele are
Is
local.
Time to Watch is still next to
this year it still will be, yeah.
Okay,
I don't
know last year they were
saying
this is the last year, the only year it can be here because this building that Time to Watches is in, which is right next to the Palexpo, is being turned into a museum, but sounds like they got a reprieve from that and they live to fight another. That space was cool, though brutally hot when you got to the upper floors.
Sure,
but the body heat just. But
I mean, just speaking from a practical standpoint, like just as somebody who
thank God
those
it's next
shows,
door.
Incredible.
Yeah, and that's good for Watches and Wonders too. It keeps you in the area. So the movers and shakers, whether it's at Watches and Wonders or brands coming off the company masthead, there you have it. A lot happening. I suspect this will not be the last time we talk about the brand reshuffling happening this year. There whether it's Zenith, maybe not, but I suspect there will be other brands that move around this year. It's in the water. There have certainly been a ton of challenges the industry has faced. These restructurings take a long time, and a lot of executive reshufflings have happened, which usually precedes this. So this will be a space we continue to watch.
Let's call it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for listening. Open Work is, of course, a podcast from Collective Horology. You can find us online at collectivehorology.com. And please send us your thoughts, your feedback, your suggestions. Send us your questions. We love questions. And to do that, you can email podcast at collectivehorology.com.
Vraiment.